Hi, welcome once again to Senior Focus. I'm your host, Bill Adams, and we come to you a couple times each month through channel 20 at Armstrong Cable. And thank you to Greg Roden, who runs channel 20 for Armstrong. And also thanks to Keith Kaiser, who's nice enough to allow us to use the Davis Visitor Center here at Mill Creek Metro Parks at the Fellows Riverside Gardens. And certainly if you haven't been out here for a while, it's a beautiful time of year to come out. Any time of year is really nice. And we're downstairs in what they call, I guess, the round room. But we're going to be talking today with attorney Elliot Legow. He is a local expert in the field of elder law, and I want to welcome you to the show.
Hi, Bill. Nice to see you again. We've done this several times over the decades.
It has been a long time running, I guess. First off, why don't we just let people know what you do, your specialty, the type of law you practice, if you want to just go into that a little bit.
Sure. I've been an attorney for, I think it's 35 years, although it's hard to keep track anymore. And for a long time now, for 20 years or so at least, I've been doing what's called elder law. Elder law is kind of a combination of estate planning, probate work, doing work with seniors on their legal document that they need, and issues about public benefits, particularly about Medicaid. Medicaid is a program that's very important for lots of folks who especially are dealing with long-term care needs, but probably have had no dealings with that program while they were younger. So it's a combination of the nursing home kind of issues and estate planning issues.
And how did you get started in this kind of work? I know you've been doing it for many years, and people look to you for as a very knowledgeable expert in the field, but how did you get started?
Well, when I first started as an attorney in Youngstown, I worked for an organization that no longer exists, but it was called Northeast Ohio Legal Services, the legal aid program in the area. And after a few years working there, I started concentrating in public benefits issues. So I worked on welfare benefits, food stamp issues, Medicaid eligibility, which was really the one that I was most interested in. I thought I could maybe do more useful things for clients. And among the groups of people that I work with were older folks, looking sometimes at the different kinds of Medicaid eligibility, but the ones that really had a lot of questions and a lot of complexity was the issues relating to nursing home care. When I moved off into private practice, which is now just about 20 years, I decided that elder law would be where I would really do my concentration. So I took my knowledge and my experience doing Medicaid eligibility work with me into private practice. So
if people come to your office, do they have to bring things in? I mean, you say somebody calls in. Mm-hmm. What do you do when you have an initial consultation? What are some of the things you're looking to find out?
Sure. I mean, it depends a little bit, of course, on exactly what issue it is the client brings to me. But what I'm basically helping people with is figuring out their financial future, both for themselves as they age. Perhaps they or a spouse needs nursing home care. And sometimes it's more generally looking at writing their wills or maybe deciding to do a trust and issues like that. So what people need to bring to me is all that financial information about themselves. So I'm having people bringing in their bank statements and their IRA statements and deed to their home, documents that they might have drafted in the past or have had drafted for them, things like wills and powers of attorney. I feel like I'm being kind of intrusive, which I am. I say, bring me everything you can tell me about your financial matters. It's sort of funny. I feel particularly uncomfortable doing legal work for people who I know. Sure. Because I don't want to ask them everything about them, but I need to in order to give them some guidance.
Right. Yeah, and I hadn't thought about that before, but really when you think about it, your attorney is just like maybe your physician or your spiritual counselor in some ways. I mean, you get involved in the most private things of people's lives, but that's what you have to do.
Absolutely. And of course, I'm sure everybody realizes this, but your discussions with your attorney are confidential.
Sure.
My wife is also an attorney, so we spend a lot of time making sure we don't talk to each other about facts about our individual cases. You know, we try to be as general as we can, but you don't, you know, especially if I have something particular that's interesting, we'll discuss the case, but certainly not who it is we're talking about in any way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure people appreciate that you know, again, they could feel trusted, or that you're, you know, trustworthy when they bring in information. And I guess, you know, you probably find a lot of situations where things maybe are pretty far down along the path before people come to talk to you.
Sure.
I'm just guessing this, but maybe one of the best things would be if people would kind of sort of plan ahead, but that doesn't always happen, right?
No, I mean, you know, not surprisingly, you're exactly right. I get so many calls. Examples would be, I mean, where it's either late or maybe even too late to do anything. I'll get a call from a family member who says, I need to get power of attorney for my mom. Why? Well, mom had a stroke, and she's in the hospital, and nobody can take care of her bank account, and mom's not able to tell anybody what she wants done. Well, a power of attorney is a very important legal document, but it's something that can be signed by me today when I'm competent and understand what I'm signing, that says that if I'm not able at some point in the future to handle my own affairs, then I name you, or I name my wife, or I name my son. But if I can't sign anything, I can't do anything about it now. And the daughter who wants to become power of attorney can't, so we might be looking at things like a guardianship in court as an alternative. Or people contact me because my husband has gone into the nursing home. Somebody told me that I really ought to talk to a lawyer to find out what happens. Well, I'm able at that point to explain the law and give people some suggestions on what they can do, but planning, again, I mean, planning means looking ahead. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, it's hard to do that sometimes. I mean, it's, you know, and people will again say, I should have done this, or somebody, I told mom to take care of such and such years ago. You know, I mean, there's good reason sometimes for not taking some steps, thinking about things you don't want to think about. Mm-hmm. But, you know, planning is, it's worth doing. You could protect yourself and your family better if you get some understanding of how the system works ahead of the need.
Yeah, and some of the things you have to think about, I guess, and you know, we're all, you mentioned how long you've been practicing, and I've been working with seniors for many years, and you know, what surprised me, or as I was thinking about it the other day, is I'm getting to the point where I'm the type of, the age where I should be listening to the advice that people have been giving over the years.
And I should be listening to my own advice too, right? Yes.
So at this age, and I say, you know, in the 50s and 60s, say, when you're, you know, pre-retirement years, do you talk with people about thinking, again, maybe down the line, you know, most people in our age group we're still at home, but one of the things that comes up as you get older, maybe some health issues, you may have to move. Now, whether it's to a facility, but it may just be to a different location. Mm-hmm. What do you, I guess the question would be, what do you talk about with people who are younger, pre-retirement?
Well, I mean, of course, that's a situation where somebody's talking who is looking into the future and can be actually planning when there's not a crisis already.
Right.
The first and foremost thing that I discuss is the subject I mentioned a couple minutes ago, which is making sure you have so-called advanced directives in place. Mm-hmm. Power of attorney for financial business matters, healthcare power of attorney, and if you're so inclined, a living will, which is a document that, as you know, says if I ever become terminally ill or in a permanent coma, I don't want life support. Having those documents in place is really the most important kind of planning anybody can do, so that if something does happen, then we have a system set up for themselves that, you know, husband can sign papers for wife, daughter can sign for father. Those are really important. And then, you know, we can look at, we'll decide on what kind of an estate plan in terms of how to put together your will. Do you need a trust, perhaps, as a way to transfer assets? Is there something particular in your family that needs particular consideration, like adult children who have disabilities? There's some important planning that should be done in that case. People who aren't married or people who don't have children have to even take more time to think through what their estate plan is, because sometimes I've been involved in situations where somebody died, didn't have a will, didn't have children, didn't have a spouse, which meant that their assets were being inherited by all sorts of distant relatives who they never knew and never saw, and that didn't make any sense.
Sure.
And talking ahead of time about the way the Medicaid program, the way nursing home costs are paid, so people understand what Medicare does and doesn't. And in terms of nursing home costs, it's mostly it doesn't.
Right.
Medicare only pays for short-term rehab stays. How Medicaid works, if it's something that people might want to plan ahead for, or whether in their situation they don't have to worry about it. And it's not a bad idea for people to think about the sense to themselves of maybe looking into purchasing long-term care insurance, which is expensive, so people often are turned off by the several $1,000s a year it might cost for premiums, but it can be very valuable in the long term. I don't have a lot of clients who sit down with me to evaluate the potential use to them of long-term care insurance, but I think that's something that more people probably ought to give thought to. It can be very valuable for the right person.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the state of Ohio has tried to promote that in some ways because, again, the thought being if people purchase long-term care insurance, they're not likely to go onto the Medicaid program, and that saves the state money.
Yeah, I mean, there's even a program that was designed federally, and then the state adopted it. By now, it's at least half a dozen years, I think, something called the Long-Term Care Partnership, I think is the name. And the concept of that is that if a person purchases long-term care insurance and uses up as much of the coverage as they buy, let's say they have $100,000 of coverage, once that has been used up, then the person would be able to qualify for Medicaid to pay for long-term care and keep not the amount of assets for a single person. Medicaid's rules in the first sentence of my outline always sounds awful because it says the resource limit for Medicaid is $1,500. There's exceptions, there's special rules for married couples, which are much more generous, but that still is basically the bottom line for a single person. Well, if you've gone through $100,000 of long-term care insurance, if you're signed up for one of these kind of programs, then Medicaid lets you keep $1,500 plus $100,000.
Okay.
So there's a real incentive in place for people to purchase long-term care insurance as a way to wind up getting Medicaid but not having to completely impoverish themselves first. So you're right, there is some effort to try to get the people to think ahead in that way. I don't think it's got very far, but it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess maybe at this point we could talk about how most people end up at your office, which is they haven't done, unfortunately, the planning. So, and let's use the example maybe of a couple. Mm-hmm. You've got a spouse who's still at home. You've got maybe one of the other spouse has to go to a facility mm-hmm. for whatever reason. In that case, kind of walk through maybe what happens with mm-hmm. those couples.
Okay. Well, I'll give you the basic rules, which are when one spouse is still living at home. The most important thing, and again, I had somebody yesterday who didn't know this and was startled to be here, and if it's good news, I'm glad they're startled. Okay. Medicaid doesn't care about the house. Mm-hmm. If, my wife had to go into long-term care and I was still at home, doesn't matter how much my house is worth, if it's in my name and her name, both of our names, Medicaid is not concerned about the house. They don't count that as an asset. They don't count one vehicle. They don't count the personal, tangible things, our furniture and our clothing and things like that. Mm-hmm. Of the rest of the assets that we have, Medicaid tallies the total. And again, they don't care if it's mine or hers. Again, the same person yesterday, maybe one of my other clients yesterday said, but that's my Christmas Club account. I said, I realize it's yours. Medicaid doesn't care. They total them all together. Mm-hmm. So they total the assets, his and hers, other than home, car, and personal property, and the total value is counted as the starting figure in doing these computations. Of that total amount of assets, Medicaid requires that the total be spent down to a certain figure. Mm-hmm. When you get to that point, that's when the spouse in the nursing home qualifies for Medicaid. It's a little greater than or equal and less than or equal to, if you remember your algebra. The spouse at home can keep half of the total assets, plus $1,500, but no more than about $115,000 this year. The number changes every year. My outline says exactly, I forget where we are exactly this year, but about 115. And no less than about 23, 25,000. So if half of your if you have $150,000, husband and wife, that Medicaid counts, you get to keep 75,000 plus 1,500. If you have 200,000, you keep 100,000 plus 1,500. If you have 300,000, you don't keep 150 because you're up to the ceiling.
Right, you can only take the ceiling.
You can keep the maximum. So you have to spend to get from that starting figure, as counted on the day the person went into the nursing home, down to the point when they will qualify for Medicaid, which sometimes sounds pretty bad and sometimes doesn't sound so terrible. Now, one reason why it might not be, again, as bad as it sounds just on first hearing, is that, and this is sort of strange, but it's good to know, that Medicaid says that you've got to spend. If you got to reduce 100 to 51,000, you have to spend $48,500. But that doesn't mean you have to spend $48,500 necessarily just on nursing home costs for however many months that might be.
Right.
Medicaid lets the spouse at home spend money on things like prepaying funeral costs, on paying off any debts. That's an important thing to do. Medicaid doesn't count one car I mentioned. You can buy a new car if you choose to. What you probably can't do is give money to your kids. That's one of the real challenges in Medicaid or for estate planning for people who say, well, I want to leave what I have to my children.
Right.
How do I do that? Can't I just give each of them? People sometimes have heard that there's some magic number that is permissible, and which I always hope people don't know about because it has nothing to do with Medicaid at all. And the bottom line is that Medicaid rules, and again, there's exceptions and there's details in all of this. I've summarized Medicaid into 6 pages, which is obviously more than we're going to talk about, but that's just a summary of some very complicated rules that are way longer than that. Rules about gift giving, basically Medicaid rules say that if you transfer assets, you give them away to somebody else, if you've transferred whatever it is more than 5 years before you might need to apply for Medicaid, they don't care. If it's less than 5 years later, they care. And they're going to penalize you by making you ineligible for Medicaid for a certain length of time based on some complicated formulas. Not surprisingly, most people who I talk to who are in good health and are thinking ahead don't want to give their property away. I mean, and yes, it would be a way to plan to preserve things for your kids, but it means it's not yours anymore. And there's lots of reasons why people choose not to make gifts until it's kind of at the point when Medicaid's not going to let them make gifts.
Right.
But I mean, sometimes those kind of strategies can be worked together. You know, these things are complicated. But anyway, that's the basics. I went several directions beyond where you asked.
But that is a point, though, that if you're in good health and a little bit younger, maybe you can make those gifts. And now nobody knows the future. 3 years from now, somebody could have a stroke or something like that. But generally, if you do make gifts when you're younger and you're in good health, that should be okay for the Medicaid.
That's correct. But
well, the other thing of what you just mentioned, though, is, and I think, just in my own experience with my own family, most of my relatives were working class, sort of, were in this area and maybe through the steel mills and things like that. So a lot of those rules indicate that basically many of the people are okay right now because they don't have the huge amount of assets.
Yeah, that's right.
To have to worry about the Medicaid.
Yeah, I mean, Medicaid, the rules work reasonably well, I think, for a married couple who have, modest to average means. If you have $100,000 of saved assets, not including your home, you wind up keeping about half, meaning the spouse at home keeps about half. And the fact that there's flexibility in how it's spent to get from this starting number to half, well, maybe you can spend most of it for the spouse at home. I'll put in one quick little don't do it. I have a whole page of don't do it's at the end. Okay. Don't prepay your funeral costs before somebody goes into a nursing home.
Okay.
And the rationale is simply that if you haven't done it before a nursing home admission, then you can spend that money as part of your spend down after nursing home admission, and you wind up, in a sense, keeping more total assets. So delay, in that case, is a wiser strategy than doing something proactively ahead of time.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think more often than not, but not always, the folks who I talk to in the married couple situations leave the office saying, it's better than I thought it was, rather than saying, oh my God, that's terrible. But it's a little bit of both, of course.
Right.
Now, again, for a single person, no spouse, the Medicaid rules are back to that one line. Well, the most important one is that one line that I mentioned, which says that the resource limit for Medicaid eligibility is $1,500. A person can qualify for Medicaid when their cash is gone and they still own a home, but sooner or later the home would have to be sold, either during their lifetime or after their death, and the state of Ohio would either get that money back after death or the money would be paid during lifetime for nursing home. That's the kind of situation for a single person where kind of the only strategies that people are looking at is like how to save something for the kids and can we make gifts, and there are some ins and outs of the rules that mean maybe you can do some gift giving even kind of late in the game, depending on some rather complicated pieces of the law. Again, I think I said before, and it's important to note here again, that if a person has a child who has disability, a person who's on Social Security disability or SSI, the rules are, again, much more flexible, and it makes sense because the law is designed to provide that a child who needs your assistance is able to receive assets as gifts without loss of eligibility from the parent who made those gifts.
Now, just again, recently, I know of a family where a spouse passed away and he was a veteran, and again, we have many veterans in this area. Do you also work with local, whether it's a Veterans Commission or the VA, on letting people know about those benefits?
I don't do veterans benefit assistance. I know some basic veterans benefit rules, but I don't get involved in those cases. I'll mention a couple things that you're probably aware of. I'm sure you are, and more and more people are becoming aware of the fact that there is a veterans benefit specifically targeted to people who are in care settings, not nursing home care, but assisted living, or people who are getting care in their home. The rule applies to a veteran or the spouse of a veteran who has served during wartime. You don't have to have been in the field of war. If a person was in the Army, joined the Army the last day of the Korean War and never got abroad, they served during wartime, so it applies to them.
Okay.
This is a benefit called aid in attendance, and the aid in attendance benefit provides for the veteran, him or herself, around $1,800 or $2,000 a month. I'm not exactly sure of the number, but about that to pay toward cost of either in-home assisted care or assisted living benefits. For the spouse of a deceased veteran, the number is more like $1,100 or $1,200. There's an asset limit of $80,000. There's an income limit. I can't recall what it is. It's not a number that generally causes problems. If a person is in a nursing home, the only difference is the number which you know well, Bill, because you've helped make it as high as it is, which is the $40 a month personal needs allowance.
Don't spend it all at once.
You were the one who got it from 25 to 30, or from 30 to 40, or were you involved in both of those?
It was 30 to 40.
Okay, and that's been stuck at 40 for quite a while now.
Right.
That was one of your major, it sounds like nothing, I suppose, $10 a month.
$120 a year, yeah.
Yeah, but you've had a lot to do with that. If you're on the aid and attendance benefit and in a nursing home, the monthly protected income is $90.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a difference. That's really, I don't know a lot more about veterans benefits, but that's an important one to be aware of. And eligibility for that is done by making application through the Veteran Services Center in Mahoning County. It's down at Oak Hill Renaissance Center, the old Southside Hospital, which of course is where the now called Ohio Department of Job and Family Services
Which you would have a lot of interaction.
Them I have a lot of dealings with, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we only have 5 minutes or so left, but...
Well, in that case, okay, if we're down to, as we discussed before, I'm going to ask you a question here, Bill.
Okay.
Because you're the one who asks everybody questions. And I know, because I've been involved in an organization called Access Health Mahoning Valley for a while, that you have come on board recently as the director of Access Health Mahoning Valley.
Right.
So why don't you tell everybody what it is and how that organization helps people?
Well, first off, what it is Access Health helps uninsured adults between the age of 19 and 64 to get health care through volunteer physicians and other medical providers. The reason it wouldn't be 65 and over is folks qualify for Medicare at that point. And the reason it's not below 19 is children would qualify under the CHIP program. But again, those adults between 19 and 64, if you know people that are uninsured and they are below 200% of the federal poverty level, we help them to find a volunteer physician, and they're fortunately about 75 at this point in Trumbull and Mahoning County volunteer doctors who will see people at no cost.
So does Access, I know the answer, but I'll ask you anyway. Does Access Health provide medical care, or is it an insurance program? Or
no, it's not insurance. It doesn't provide care, but again, it hooks up. It's like a matchmaker, I guess, between somebody who is uninsured and would not have health care, and it makes sure that that person has a medical home. That's the name. Medical home basically means a doctor to go to on a regular basis. And the reason this is helpful to the community, besides helping the individuals who wouldn't get medical care otherwise, is many of the people, who are uninsured, in desperate times or for whatever reason, they'll end up at an emergency room. Sure. Because they have nowhere else to go. So just in, Access Health Mahoning Valley has been up and running for a couple years. So my understanding is there's been a savings of a couple $100,000 at least through one healthcare system in their ER visits. Mm-hmm. So the people who were going to the ER aren't going as often now. So that's a pretty big savings to local health care.
So how many people are participating in Access Health currently?
Over 500 are active. Over 750, I think, have signed up since it started. Mm-hmm. And people can, get in touch with us. One thing to know, and this sort of ties in with, the new change in the law, the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
Seniors specifically won't be affected by this. They're still going to be on Medicare. But we, Access Health Mahoning Valley, will be helping people in the coming months as we get funding to, and we'll have a person called a navigator, or maybe two people acting as navigators to help with the new law.
So that kind of relates to what we've been reading in the paper about. In fact, I think you were in the paper too, right? About the issues.
Recently, the Vindicator's been talking about the new Affordable Care Act. So,
and obviously, lots of people don't know quite how it's going to all work.
Mm-hmm.
And Access Health is going to help people figure out how they fit into the system. And now this time, it's going to actually be helping them get insurance rather than just getting
people will
care.
sign up for actual insurance policies through the state. These are the Ohio Department of Insurance certifies these insurance companies. So, well, I appreciate your asking.
Thank you.
And again, we've been talking with attorney Elliot Legow. He is a specialist in elder law and has been in the area for a number of years. And certainly, if you have any questions about elder law, he is a good person to go to, and he can answer your questions, and he'll do so in a confidential way and very skilled way. So appreciate your coming on.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Nice to be working with you for all these years.
And again, you've been watching Senior Focus. My name is Bill Adams. We come to you through Armstrong's Channel 20, thanks to Greg Roden, who provides this service to the public, and also thanks to Keith Kaiser at Mill Creek Metro Parks for allowing us to use the beautiful Davis Visitor Center. Until our next show, thanks for watching.